hear me?
Yep.
All right. So welcome everyone to Age at Work event. We're really thrilled to welcome all of you here. My name is Stella Lumpashor. I am the founder of Amazing Community and partner with Next for Me in organizing this series of events focused on working later in life and having a fulfilling and financially sustainable career. Unfortunately, Jeff had a late-breaking family emergency, and unfortunately he cannot make it today. But we will make sure that we bring all the messages and the same experience that he had in mind to contribute. I'm really happy to have a partner in crime from the Next for Me, Drew Tompkin. You'll see him walking around, taking videos, taking pictures. I also would love to thank all of our contributors and sponsors. So we have Vizier, Leap, Finance of America, Reverse, and Wisdom Essential. Thank you so much for your generosity. Also would like to welcome and thank our promotional partners, Change Catalyst, Power to Fly, Meteor, Startup Decoder, Matheson, Silvernest, Modern Elder Academy, and I Lounge. Moderating the conversation tonight is Diane Harris. Diane is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Newsweek. Before joining Newsweek, she was Editorial Director of Considerable and spent the bulk of her time at Manny Magazine. And you're the first woman to be Editor-in-Chief there as well. Tonight,
only.
No, the only, exactly. That's a lot. So tonight we'll spend probably about an hour on engaging in the conversation with the panel, and then we'll have Q&A segment, and then we'll wrap it up with some social gathering and chatting and networking and socializing. So Diane, I'm really thrilled to pass the microphone to you.
Thank you so much, Stella, and I am delighted to be here. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. Not only have I written and reported about it at length over many years of my career, but I live it every single day. So I'm really interested in the conversation that we're about to have. I thank you all for coming out. It is my first in-person event of the pandemic, and I appreciate being in the company of others, not via Zoom.
Amen.
So, I want to welcome our illustrious panelists. First, Carrie Hannon. Carrie Hannon is a leading expert and strategist on work and jobs, entrepreneurship, personal finance and retirement. She is the author of more than a dozen books, including Great Pajama Jobs, Your Complete Guide to Working from Home, Never Too Old to Get Rich, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Starting a Business Midlife, and Great Jobs for Everyone 50 Plus. Her latest, In Control at 50 Plus, How to Succeed in the New World of Work, will be published by McGraw-Hill next spring. Carrie is a frequent keynote speaker, a TV, radio, and podcast commentator. I'm exhausted just saying all this. And a columnist and a regular contributor to the New York Times, Market Watch, Forbes, and the PBS website Next Avenue. She's also my dear friend of 30 years, and in our socializing portion, asked me about Vegas. Bradley Sherman is a demographic futurist and opinion maker on all things dealing with the business of longevity. He is also the founder and CEO of The Super Age, a consulting firm specializing in helping organizations understand the challenges and harness the opportunities of demographic change with a focus on population aging. He is an entrepreneur, a sought-after speaker on the topics of aging and longevity, a social connector, really both of them exhaust me, and an author. His new book, The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, will be published by HarperCollins in January. Bradley is a new friend. I don't have any Vegas stories to share about him,
We'll make
but
some.
we'll make our own. We'll make our own. So, there's no way to start a conversation about the future of work these days without first talking about the pandemic, what we've just been through, are still going through, and what the impact will be. So I want to start off just by asking you guys, one common insight about the pandemic as it relates to work is that it's exposed cracks in our social and work system that were already there. For example, it's certainly exposed something about the difficulty of juggling caregiving with a job. It's certainly shown us much more than many of us knew about the challenges that low-wage workers face. What cracks in the system has the pandemic exposed that are specific to older workers? What has the pandemic shown us? What do we understand more about the challenges that older workers face? I'll throw it over to both of you.
Yeah, well, for me, Diane, you kind of alluded to this in your intro there, is if I were to pick one aspect, one thing about work that sort of came up through the cracks, it's this caregiving issue. And for older workers who are often caring for an aging parent or an aging relative, we're not talking about childcare. This is there, and I lived this. I had my 91-year-old mom with me, and I was hanging by a string, trying to do my work and caregive for mom. I work for myself. I don't know how people who have jobs, when everyone was at home, and that was all of a sudden employers started to see this. This is something in the workplace that is completely taboo. It's okay to talk about leaving work to go to Johnny's soccer game, but not to take your mom to some appointment for elder care of some sort. So I think that employers started to see that the strain of caring for elder relatives on their employees, and how difficult, and people wouldn't talk to their bosses or their managers about this when they're in office because they're afraid. They're afraid that they will not get an assignment, or they won't get promoted, or it is seen as a weakness that is taking them out of the workplace. And so I think it has brought caregiving into the spotlight in a way that is good. And it revealed this crack that people, the strain and the stress on them. And so what has happened, and we have this in general with the pandemic, is that it gave new attention to mental health and self-care, and employers started to say, oh my gosh, I need to think about what's going on behind the scenes with the people who work for me. And this is one of those things that just it's just been underlying the surface, and it came up, and I think this is an important time because people left their jobs because of caregiving. And now if there's some attention, and we can talk a little more about this, but there is a movement in this space of employers actually doing something now. As we turn the corner, it came to the forefront.
Well, I think to build off that point and then to highlight a few others, the caregiving piece was such a dramatic and I think shock to employers. No one really realized how much individuals had to deal with. What we saw, I think for the first time ever, as a common thread amongst working generations was that everyone wanted flexibility. Literally everyone wanted flexibility. And we like to pit generations against each other all the time. It's fun. It's fun, it's sport for most of us. But the reality is, flexibility became the one thing that united us as workers. We need to have essentially a negotiated return back into the office. And as I talk to employers, they say, yeah, I can't get some people back to the office. Well, they're negotiating their return with you right now. I think the other thing that the pandemic laid bare was just how comfortable we are with being ageist, or at least employers are with being ageist. Because in large part, I think in the dark of night, employers let chunks of older populations go. And this created, I think, an unusual reality, and we'll get to this, I think, a bit deeper later on, but it enhanced what was already going to be a difficult period in terms of the supply of labor in the workforce. It actually made the supply of labor smaller than it needed to be. And now we're going to have to, at least employers are going to have to really deal with this in the coming years. They're going to have to figure out a way forward that is inclusive of all generations.
Can you, just talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not sure. I think that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Did people realize it happened?
I think people are waking up to it now. I think that's the thing about. One of the things that's the most amazing about the pandemic is we lost the human connection with folks. We lost that day-to-day touch, but eyes opened in ways that didn't open before. Storylines became constant across digital platforms, and I think the commonality, we went from these one-off stories of so-and-so lost their job because they said they cost too much, or they were made redundant because of a younger worker. They could get 2 or 3 people to do the same job. I think there's a more dramatic thread now, a consistent one of people just being let go because they cost too much.
Yeah.
And it was done in the dark of night in some companies. It was done under the cover of COVID. And we're just kind of waking up to exactly what happened in these organizations now.
Yeah, I think there was fear. I think they were really concerned about the viability of their businesses going forward, especially in the early days where they didn't know,
Mhm.
you know, how is the workplace shifting? What is going on? Will we ever get back to the profitability that we once had, or will the supply chains be the same? All those kinds of things. So they tried desperately to get lean and mean as quickly as they could,
Mhm.
and that was the line fruit. We can just offer off these early retirement packages, or put someone, you know, on furlough, whatever it might be, until they you know, see where things were headed. And often those people weren't invited back, or they were encouraged to accept those packages. And it was because they had their real estate, their footprint, they're trying to figure out what to do with all the office space. So it was a real cost-saving move to pick off those quickly.
And I think there was also a concern early on. Let me just be
Yeah, yeah.
clear about this. I think there was a concern from employers that older workers, and this is anecdotal, this is just from conversations, there's no hard data yet to back this up, but I think there was this initial fear that older workers weren't going to be able to make the digital transformation. They weren't going to be able to compete online. They didn't have the digital skill set in place to be a productive member of the workforce.
Which has been proven wrong.
Which has been proven wrong dramatically, but not before there was a big mistake. And that was letting go of some of the most valuable, experienced members of the team, just because we thought, because of ageism, they couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
Older workers showed,
Yeah.
in many ways, showed the most resilience during the pandemic.
I think so. Yeah, because they've been through these.
They've been
before.
through it before.
They
yeah.
didn't overreact. All the studies show the emotional quotient, that more millennials and Gen X's, and they had more depression and more emotional setbacks than an older worker who has, you know, yes, they had concerns, but they seem to, from that perspective, manage much better.
So here's the underlying question for me. Both of these things are true, and there's data, right? I mean, that it's certainly true that particularly in the early stages of the pandemic, older workers were let go at greater rates than younger workers, and it's also, you know, both anecdotally we see it and in data that that older workers proved as a group to be more resilient, like we were, and for exactly the reasons that you say, we've been through it, so a little bit better able to weather some of the emotional ups and downs. What I'm just not so sure of is that it's recognized. You know, that's you know,
We won't know that for a while.
We won't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can't crystal ball that. It takes, we're still in the middle of this, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So, Carrie, one of the things that you talk about in your book and that you've talked about to me is, you know, something else that happened over the course of the pandemic is an acceleration in trends that were happening in the workforce before that are particularly relevant and resonant with older workers. Can you talk a little bit about those,
Thanks,
those trends?
Diane. Yeah, and actually that's what in my new book that that'll be out next year, In Control at 50 Plus, is all I sort of discuss these big trends I saw coming up. And again, absolutely correct. These things had started, and what happened is it just hit the gas, right? You know, pedal to the metal. And the major trends that I saw coming out of the pandemic are, number one, and this is, you know, you've all noticed this as well, remote work is here to stay, right? The genie's out of the bottle. This used to be something that you had to negotiate with your boss to get the flex time, to be able to work a couple days a week. I mean, it was really one of those perks of the job. But younger workers have started to ask their, you know, when they were looking for work or when they were applying for a job, when they were in interviews, they were asking for this. They wanted the remote option. So we ended up, there was sort of many companies had started to put some of this in place. But now it was all in place for everybody. And things are never gonna go back the way they were. Now it is accepted. People understand, employers understand that, yay, guess what? You know, they did get the job done. We did save money. It was a cost saver, which is very important to them. And across all age groups, it has been a pretty good experiment for everyone. But that's not gonna be permanent. Obviously, the hybrid workplace is gonna be where we're headed to. But I think older workers will stay remote as much as, in greater numbers than they ever had. And it's accepted, that's okay. I mean, just the sheer number of people who have sort of benefited from this. So I want to talk about, just quickly, I think remote work is amazing for older workers in fighting ageism. It's fantastic because, number one, you're not judged a book by its cover as much as you are in the workplace. So it's not that subliminal thing where you're next to a younger worker and you're being judged by your gray hair or your saggy neck or whatever it might be, just physically, you know? So it's not.
Ladies can still see that.
Not if you have a scarf. You know? But they,
No camera on.
But I think it's really good in the terms of fighting ageism that way because it gives you an opportunity to show that you're judged on your performance and your productivity. This is what's important to employers. And so, and the ability, the other thing about remote work that I love for old workers is many people say, oh, I'm gonna work longer, but they ended up retiring earlier than they expect to. And often it's because of a health issue. It's because they can't, you know, the commute is too long or the workplace isn't set up that's conducive for whatever their physical thing might be. And so by remote working, you eliminate a lot of those things. So if you have a disability, if you have an age-related health issue, the opportunity to work remotely is a really wonderful thing. So I like that. Those are sort of the nutshell. The second thing, that's a whole, you know, many chapters on remote work. Oh, I wrote a book on it. Anyway, and then the second big trend is entrepreneurship. I think that definitely workers who have this time to sit at home and kind of do that inner soul searching and say, you know, what are my priorities? What really matters to me? Because we were afraid, we were losing people. I don't know if you all did, but I know several people who died from COVID and it was heartbreaking and it sort of put a lot of things into perspective. And so the sort of fragility of life, and people say, you know, I've always wanted to do this and this is my time. So I see a lot of entrepreneurship over 50, the demographic is booming and starting businesses. We're not talking major businesses. Some of them are just little side gigs or side hustles for now, but they have potential. They're entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship, I think, is great. Again, not everyone's hardwired for it. I don't, you know, you can, you know, you might not be able to pay yourself initially. Financially, there could be some real deep things you have to really make sure you're financially set up in order to do that. Or, you know, you have to say, why me, why now, why this? Service or this product. So there's a lot of things that go into it. The third big thing that sort of is career transition. More and more people in this demographic over 50 are changing careers because they may have taken that package and they say, you know what, I do want to keep working, so I'm just going to redeploy my skills over here. It's not these major shifts from, you know, I wrote a book about people who went from, you know, Navy pilot to managing a circus troupe. So it's not that big of a job switch, but they're learning to take their skills and go into an area where there are jobs, where there's tech or health or education, or, you know, where there's job opportunities. They're repurposing. So there's a lot more career transition going on than ever. It used to be only the risk takers and the outliers, you know, would start a new career. They're like, jeepers, do you have the runway to do that? Well, yeah, sure you do. And so it's become more acceptable to change careers. And the final, well, lifelong learning, which is a whole other thing, but education, suddenly people are paying attention. So that's a big trend, that's the access to that. But the final piece of this, and it goes into the remote thing a lot, is contract positions are really exploded. And again, this is employers taking advantage of this opportunity,
Yep.
As you mentioned, Bradley, because they're saying, oh, guess what? I can get you to work. And this experienced worker who's really talented, don't pay your benefits. And so, you know, they bring it down to, so if you look on the job boards, there are lots of remote opportunities. but they're for a certain time period, they don't have benefits. And depending, like if you're looking for your job in your 50s or in your 60s or in your 70s, these are three complete different job markets. These are three different, you have different things you want at those different ages or need at those different ages. So a remote work contract job when you're in your late 60s or 70s might be absolutely perfect. But here's what worries me, Diane.
Or the only thing that you can get.
Oh, yes, but it's still, it can be a way to make it your pillar of your retirement plan because it's your safety net. You can earn income, you're not dependent on it as your primary source of income, but it adds to your whole balance of where your income stream is in supporting longer lives, right? So I think it's great because if you want to continue to work to deal with the longevity next years, but you don't need the full freight of all the benefits. But what's concerning is for someone who's 50 and 55 and you still want to be paying into these retirement accounts, you still need the health and benefits. I work for myself and my healthcare benefits are $800 a month. I mean, this is extraordinary, and this is, I don't have any health issues. So I'm saying people want those health benefits. And so if you're in your 50s and I'm like getting remote work, and I fear I talk about this a lot, is elder poverty and the fact that people haven't saved enough for retirement. And when you don't have an employer's retirement plan that's kind of forcing you to save, out of sight, out of mind, it's really hard to set money aside for retirement when you're just working in these contract positions. And it takes a lot of self-discipline and automating everything, and really you're not making, it's hard to make ends meet that way. So that's my fear, but there's also positive things. And so those are sort of the major trends I see coming up. But again, they were all in place before. So it's not like the world has changed. What has happened is it's just, wow. It's just hit the accelerator.
Bradley, do you see those, first of all, do you agree? And second, does it seem like a net positive, a negative, or what?
Oh, Lord. I do agree. I think that there is a transition underfoot that's been happening for some time. I do think the pandemic supercharged it in a way that we're still reeling from. We're still trying to get our heads around. I mean, I'm sure you are. I actually met with my publisher today. I said, I'm definitely afraid that my book is out of date already, just because of the transition that we're going through right now.
It is not.
It is not. The reality for older workers is shifting though. I do think that we cast entrepreneurism as these kind of unicorn companies, and we think that everyone who is an entrepreneur is somehow doing this big splashy thing, but Carrie's absolutely right. It's homespun industries in many regards. I do think the contract work is going to continue. I also think that we're starting to see some glimmers of hope around industries where they've been struggling with workforce shortages for years. They're embracing this reality a lot faster than organizations that maybe have relied on younger workers for most of their workforce. I have a client where 50% of their workforce are millennials. I mean, that's not sustainable. That just isn't sustainable. So when you think about the businesses and how they're considering older workers, it's the ones that are threatened by a labor shortage that are making the adjustments now. And they're doing so in benefit design, they're doing so in ergonomics in the office place or on the factory floor to extend working lives. They're giving their employees that flexibility that they need, they so desperately want to stay engaged, and that's a net positive. The entire benefit structure that we thought was so amazing in this country was born at a time when we had a labor shortage. It was born in the post-war economy, and what most people don't realize is that in 1950, when you looked at the labor force participation rate of men, since men were primarily working at the time, over the age of 65, it was nearing 50%, which is insane.
Yeah.
By 1990, we had eroded that number down to 14%. And now we're hovering around 20 and growing because we've got a shortage, and it's not going to end anytime soon. We've had 6 years of contracting birth rates. Last year was our lowest birth rate on record, and there is no indication anywhere at any time that this will slow down.
And that's a global issue.
And that's a global issue.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. So, where does the positive come from? The positive comes from when there's a scarcity of resources. Pure economic theory. There's a scarcity of resources, there's a supply, and there's a demand issue. There are literally not enough people to go into jobs right now. Where we have some hiccups, ageism is a big hiccup. It's
Yeah.
probably the biggest hiccup. We can't get over our bias, which is bullshit. But the second piece is that bias has built itself into so many different parts of the economy that we can't necessarily see the forest through the trees. So even within the software that's designed to pick out candidates now, there's a bias against older workers built into that software.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah, can you
because
talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
because that's.
I want you-
that's-
I mean,
I mean,
this is your
yeah,
area
but
of
I mean,
expertise.